Michael Jackson and Paul McCartney's friendship began in a way that felt almost magical to people who worked around them. It started with a simple phone call in the early 1980s, a time when both artists were reaching new heights in their careers. Michael was becoming the biggest pop star in the world, while Paul had already lived a legendary life with the Beatles and was enjoying strong success as a solo artist. Even though they came from different generations, there was a natural connection between them. People often say that true friendships happen without effort, and in their case, that seemed completely true. Michael had admired Paul for years before they officially met. As a child, he had listened to Beatles songs with a sense of wonder. To him, the Beatles were not just musicians, they were creators of worlds. Their melodies, their stories, and their energy had shaped the young artist's imagination. When the opportunity came to collaborate with Paul, Michael felt both excited and humbled. He respected Paul not only as a musician, but as someone who had changed music forever. Paul, on the other hand, was pleasantly surprised by Michael. He saw a young man who was quiet, polite, and incredibly focused. Despite his fame, Michael was gentle in his manner and often looked for guidance from people he trusted. Paul enjoyed this dynamic because it reminded him of the early days of the Beatles, when he and his bandmates had once been young dreamers, eager to learn from others. Michael was different from many stars Paul had met. He wasn't loud, he wasn't arrogant, and he didn't carry himself with a sense of superiority. Instead, he carried a soft kindness that made people feel comfortable. Their first major collaboration began with the song "The Girl Is Mine." It was a playful duet about two men teasing each other over the same girl. The writing process was fun and lighthearted, and that energy carried into the recording sessions. Michael and Paul spent hours in the studio, sharing ideas and laughing at small jokes. Michael had a warm laugh that made everyone around him smile, and Paul enjoyed watching him experiment with melodies. Michael often danced in the studio while singing, letting his body move with the rhythm. Paul found that charming and refreshing. During breaks in the recording, the two of them would sit together and talk about more than just music. They discussed life, family, and dreams. Michael asked Paul about his early experiences with the Beatles, curious about everything, from their first tours to how they wrote their biggest hits. Paul enjoyed telling those stories, and Michael listened carefully, absorbing every detail. The bond between them felt natural. Even though Paul was older, he didn't treat Michael like a child. He saw him as a fellow artist, someone who had earned his place in music through hard work and natural talent. One of the topics Paul often talked about was the importance of owning music publishing rights. He explained how song ownership worked and how it affected an artist's long-term success. To Paul, this was not just business advice. It was something he had learned from personal experience. Over the years, he had faced situations where he didn't have full control over his own songs, and he wanted Michael to understand the system better. At the time, these conversations were simple and friendly. They were the kind of discussions one would expect between two musicians who respected each other deeply. Michael listened with great interest. He admired Paul not only for his creativity, but for his intelligence. Michael had always wanted to understand the deeper side of the music world, beyond the stage lights and applause. Paul's stories opened a new world for him. Michael began to think about music not only as art, but also as a legacy, something that could live long after a performer was gone. Paul told him that owning music meant owning a piece of history, something that could help support future generations. That idea meant a lot to Michael, who cared deeply about his family and his future. As their friendship grew, Michael visited Paul's home in England. Paul and his wife welcomed him warmly. They treated him not like a superstar, but like a friend visiting for dinner. Michael loved spending time with their family, playing with Paul's daughter, and watching how Paul balanced music with a simple, joyful home life. To Michael, this was something rare. His own life had been filled with work since he was a child, and seeing Paul's peaceful family setting made him feel comforted. It was during these friendly visits that Paul showed Michael his notebook filled with publishing details. Paul sometimes joked about how surprising it was to receive checks from songs written many years ago. He told Michael about humorously receiving small payments for short tunes or jingles that he barely remembered creating. Michael found these stories both amusing and insightful. He asked questions and took mental notes, eager to understand more. Their second collaboration, Say, 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 strengthened their bond even further. The music video they filmed together captured the playful spirit of their friendship. In it, they danced, joked, and performed as two cheerful entertainers traveling from town to town. Behind the scenes, the atmosphere was just as joyful. The crew remembered how the two stars seemed like ordinary friends, teasing each other and sharing meals between takes. There was no competition, no tension, only harmony. Many people who witnessed their friendship firsthand described it as pure and sincere. Michael looked up to Paul, and Paul felt protective of Michael. They seemed to bring out the best in each other. Their personalities complemented one another. Paul had a steady, grounded energy, while Michael brought a childlike excitement that made even the most ordinary moments feel special. Despite the difference in their ages and backgrounds, they had one powerful thing in common: their deep love for music. Both had started young, both had experienced the pressures of fame, and both understood what it meant to pour one's heart into every performance. These shared experiences created an emotional bridge between them. They were two artists who loved what they did and who admired each other's talent without hesitation. When they spoke about future collaborations, both seemed genuinely enthusiastic. Michael hoped they would continue making music together, and Paul believed their partnership would lead to even more memorable songs. Their friendship felt like the beginning of something long-lasting. What neither of them knew at that time was how a simple piece of business advice, given casually, with good intentions, would later play a major role in shaping the future of their relationship. But during this early period, there were no shadows, no worries, and no misunderstandings. There was only creativity, respect, and a growing connection between two of the most influential musicians in the world. For a while, it truly seemed like nothing could break the bond forming between Michael Jackson and Paul McCartney. They were not just collaborators, they were two people who enjoyed each other's company, supported each other, and inspired each other in a way that few artists ever get to experience. When Michael Jackson and Paul McCartney were enjoying their growing friendship, something important was quietly happening behind the scenes of the music world, something neither of them knew would later change their relationship forever. It all began with a large music catalog known as ATV Music Publishing. This catalog was famous because it held rights to many classic songs, including most of the songs written by John Lennon and Paul McCartney during their time with the Beatles. To people in the music business, ATV was like a treasure chest. It contained some of the most valuable melodies and lyrics ever written. At first, the idea of the catalog being sold was not widely known. Only a few people close to the business had any hint that the owners might be considering a sale. Companies that controlled old song catalogs often kept such decisions private until they were ready to talk to potential buyers. But whispers slowly spread across the industry. People began to wonder what might happen if ATV ever ended up on the market. Could anyone afford it? Who would want it? How would it change the future of music publishing? Paul had always cared deeply about the songs he had written with John Lennon. Those songs were a huge part of his life. He remembered the nights they stayed up writing, the moments of inspiration, the laughter they shared in small recording rooms. For Paul, the Beatles' songs were not just music. They were pieces of his history. Even though he had written half of them, the publishing rights had long ago been sold by others, leaving him with limited control over his own creations. So when rumors appeared that ATV might be offered for sale, Paul naturally became interested. He felt it might be his chance to finally regain ownership of his own work. Meanwhile, Michael was also becoming more aware of how the publishing world worked. He remembered the conversations he'd had with Paul during their early friendship. Paul had spoken openly about music ownership, about how buying copyrights was one of the smartest moves a musician could make. At that time, it sounded like an interesting business idea to Michael, something he might explore someday. But he had never imagined that one day they might be looking at the same catalog. It was Michael's lawyer who first mentioned that ATV might soon be available. When he heard this, Michael became curious. He was not thinking about competition or stepping into anyone's path. He simply saw an opportunity to invest in something meaningful. The idea of owning songs that had shaped the world of music sounded inspiring to him. Michael took business seriously. Even though he was kind and soft-spoken, he had a sharp mind for long-term decisions. He believed that music publishing was not just business. It was about honoring the past and protecting legacies. As the catalog quietly moved closer to being sold, several wealthy investors and companies started preparing their offers. People began meeting behind closed doors, studying the financial value of the catalog, listing the songs it contained, and trying to predict its future growth. Some believed the sale would go smoothly, while others thought it would be too complicated because the catalog was huge and involved many legal details. Paul, still hoping for a chance to buy back his songs, spoke to his advisors. He wanted to make an offer, but he also wanted to be wise. Purchasing a large catalog required careful thinking. It was not like buying a car or a house. It involved negotiations, lawyers, agreements, and lots of patience. Paul had been through music industry battles in the past, and he knew these processes could be slow and stressful. At the same time, Michael began discussing the idea with his advisors as well. He asked questions, stayed calm, and thought things through carefully. He didn't rush into anything. He was always cautious when it came to business decisions. His team gathered information about the catalog, the songs, and the approximate value. The more Michael learned, the more he felt this might be an important opportunity for him. Eventually, the owners of ATV officially announced that they were ready to sell. This marked the beginning of a bidding process that felt almost like a quiet competition. There were no loud arguments or public disagreements, just private offers sent discreetly through business channels. The bids were confidential, but people behind the scenes could sense the tension rising. This was not an ordinary sale. This was history on the table. Some bidders placed offers simply because they wanted a profitable investment. Others were attracted by the prestige of owning one of the most iconic catalogs of all time. But for Paul, it was personal. The songs he had created with John Lennon were part of his identity. He wanted them to return to a place where they were protected and understood. Yet despite his interest, Paul did not want to overpay. He had already been through difficult experiences with publishers in the past. He did not want to get caught in a bidding war that could raise the price far beyond what he believed was reasonable. Because of this, he approached the situation slowly and cautiously. Michael's advisors encouraged him to make a strong offer. They knew he admired the Beatles and respected music from all eras. They also knew that the catalog had enormous long-term value. While some people in the business world were surprised to hear that a pop star so young was interested in such a significant investment, those who knew Michael well were not shocked at all. He had always been forward-thinking. He was not someone who spent money carelessly. He wanted to build something meaningful that would last for generations. As bidding continued, Michael's team remained patient but determined. They submitted an offer that showed they understood the true worth of the catalog. While some investors hesitated or adjusted their offers, Michael stayed steady. He wasn't trying to win against anyone. He simply believed in the value of the music. In 1985, after months of careful evaluation and comparison, the owners of ATV made their final decision. They accepted Michael Jackson's offer of $47.5 million. The news spread across the industry like a spark. People were stunned. It became one of the most talked-about business deals in music history. Michael felt proud and grateful. To him, it was not just a business purchase. It was a chance to preserve songs he deeply admired. He believed he was protecting timeless art. But as the excitement of the sale echoed through studios and offices, a quiet wave of surprise also reached Paul. For him, the news felt unexpected. Although he knew Michael respected him and had learned from their conversations, he hadn't imagined that Michael would also bid for the catalog, especially the one containing Beatles songs. Paul had always liked Michael and viewed him as a friend, so the news came with mixed feelings. He wasn't angry, and he didn't accuse Michael of doing anything wrong. But he did feel caught off guard. He had hoped, at the very least, that he would have been spoken to before the deal was finalized. The situation was complicated, not because of business rules, but because emotions, memories, and friendships were involved. Michael, on the other hand, believed he had made a wise decision that even Paul would understand. He did not see the purchase as a betrayal or a challenge. He saw it as following the very advice Paul had once shared with him. In Michael's heart, he felt he had done something respectful and smart, something that honored the importance of music publishing. What neither of them realized at that moment was that this business deal, made with calm voices and quiet paperwork, would slowly act like a shadow over their friendship. For now, though, the purchase was complete. The music world was whispering, journalists were taking notes, and Michael Jackson had just become the owner of one of the most legendary music catalogs in history. When the news spread that Michael Jackson had bought the ATV catalog, the atmosphere around him changed almost overnight. People in the music business were shocked, reporters were amazed, and even longtime professionals could not stop talking about it. But beyond all the noise and excitement, there was one person whose reaction mattered more than anyone else: Paul McCartney. Paul first heard about the purchase in a way that felt distant and unexpected. It was not through a personal call or a message from Michael. Instead, he heard it the same way the rest of the world did, from the industry buzz and official announcements that followed the final decision. For Paul, the moment felt strange. He respected Michael deeply, and he had always enjoyed their friendship, but this news made him pause. He had hoped to buy the catalog himself, or at least be part of the conversation. Now the situation was suddenly out of his hands. Paul was not angry, nor did he blame Michael for doing something wrong. Michael had played by the rules of business, and the sale was completely fair. Yet, despite knowing this, Paul felt something inside him shift, not sharp, not loud, but quiet and heavy, like the beginning of a long sigh. He wondered why Michael had not talked to him before making such a big move. Even a small conversation would have helped him understand things better. For Paul, the Beatles' songs were like pieces of his youth, and he had hoped to bring them home someday. It was not only about money, it was about memories, history, and personal meaning. While Paul was trying to make sense of his feelings, Michael was experiencing something very different. He felt proud of the purchase. To him, it was a step forward in securing a strong future, one that would protect music he loved. Michael genuinely believed Paul would admire his decision. After all, Paul had once told him to invest in music publishing. Michael thought he was honoring the advice of a mentor. He did not imagine it might become a point of tension between them. As weeks passed, their friendship did not break suddenly. It changed slowly, almost quietly, like a plant that begins to wilt without anyone noticing at first. Their conversations became less frequent. Some of this happened naturally. Both were busy, always working, traveling, performing, and creating. But there was also an invisible distance growing between them, one that neither of them openly addressed. Music had always brought them together. When they were in the studio, Everything felt easy and joyful. But now, even the idea of working together felt complicated. Paul did not want to bring up his personal disappointment, and Michael did not realize anything was wrong. This mismatch in understanding made their relationship feel uneven. They were still friendly, but something had changed around the edges. People who worked near them noticed the difference. Before, when Michael visited Paul's home, the atmosphere was full of laughter, music, and warm conversation. Now, the visits became rare. The cheerful familiarity that once defined their interactions seemed to fade. Neither of them intended for this to happen, but sometimes silence can grow louder than words. Paul tried to stay professional and calm, as he always had been. He never spoke harshly about Michael, but he did share his feelings in gentle interviews. He explained that he had hoped for a chance to buy back his songs. He confessed that he felt surprised to see the catalog go to a friend without any discussion. There was no anger in his words, only a shade of disappointment. Michael heard some of these comments, and they left him confused. He did not understand why his business move had created so much emotional weight. He had always separated friendship from business in his mind. To him, the purchase was simply a wise decision, one that anyone in his position might have made. He believed Paul would eventually see it the same way. But the truth is that people do not always feel the same way about the same situation. Paul carried the songs in his heart. Michael viewed the catalog as a meaningful investment. Both were understandable perspectives, yet they did not align. And where understanding is missing, distance often grows. Still, they never argued. There were no harsh letters, no public disagreements, no dramatic meetings. Their friendship did not fall apart loudly. It faded quietly. What once had been warm and comfortable slowly turned into something formal and distant. Behind the scenes, Michael continued to manage the catalog with care. He respected the songs and valued their history. He saw himself as a guardian of something precious. But each time he worked with the catalog, there was an unspoken awareness that it had also become a symbol of a complicated turn in his friendship with Paul. Paul, meanwhile, continued to perform, write songs, and explore new projects. He was never the kind of person to hold long-lasting resentment, but the purchase left a soft ache in his heart, something he rarely talked about but always remembered. He missed the lightheartedness that had once defined his relationship with Michael. The playful spirit they shared during the recording of Say, Say, Say now felt like it belonged to another time. Some of Paul's friends advised him to let the situation go. They reminded him that Michael had not acted with any negative intention. Paul understood this, and he never believed Michael meant to hurt him. But intentions do not always stop emotions from forming, especially when something carries deep personal meaning. As months turned into years, the silence between them grew stronger than any attempt to repair the friendship. They were both kind-hearted men, but neither took the step needed to bridge the gap. Perhaps they were too busy, perhaps they felt unsure, or perhaps they feared saying the wrong thing. Whatever the reason, the opportunity to reconnect slowly drifted away. People in the industry noticed that the two stars no longer collaborated. Some fans wondered why their partnership had ended after producing such wonderful music together. Very few people knew the real reason, and even those who guessed could only see the surface. What happened between Michael and Paul was not anger. It was misunderstanding, simple, quiet, human misunderstanding. Michael did not celebrate the separation. He always carried a soft respect for Paul, and he never spoke negatively about him. He kept the catalog safe, handled the songs responsibly, and continued to admire the brilliance of the Beatles, but a part of him also missed the joy they once shared. Paul also looked back on their friendship with warmth, remembering the kind and gentle young man who had shown so much admiration. He never wished Michael harm. He simply carried the disappointment as a small shadow that stayed beside the memories of their happier times. Both men continued to shine in their careers, each following his own path. But the friendship that once had the power to create magic in the studio now existed only in memories, beautiful, distant, and untouched by time. What remained between them was not bitterness. It was silence. And sometimes silence can feel heavier than anger because it holds all the words that were never spoken. After the ATV catalog sale, the distance between Michael Jackson and Paul McCartney continued to grow, not because of any angry words or sharp disagreements, but because of the quiet misunderstandings that neither of them addressed. As time passed, the story of the purchase began spreading through newspapers, music magazines, interviews, and casual conversations. Reporters loved the drama of it. The idea of a huge business deal affecting a friendship between two of the world's most beloved musicians. Even though neither Michael nor Paul ever spoke negatively about the other, the world around them started shaping its own story. Paul found himself being asked about the catalog repeatedly. Journalists wanted to know how he felt about Michael owning most of the Beatles' songs, especially the ones he had written with John Lennon. Paul tried to answer politely each time. He didn't want to speak in a way that would make Michael seem like an enemy. He respected Michael and knew he had simply made a business decision. Still, Paul couldn't hide the small disappointment he felt. It appeared in his gentle tone, in the slight pause before he answered, and in the way he often explained that he had once hoped to buy the songs himself. What Paul found most uncomfortable was not the purchase itself, but the new dynamic it created. When Michael owned the catalog, it changed the way Paul interacted with his own music. He sometimes received letters or notices about licensing decisions, requests for Beatles songs to be used in commercials or other projects. Normally, these decisions would have been up to the publisher. Now, because Michael was the new owner, Paul found himself dealing indirectly with someone he had once viewed as a close friend. It made the situation feel awkward. It wasn't dramatic, but it wasn't easy either. For Michael, the world looked very different. He was proud of the catalog and worked hard with his team to manage it carefully. He knew that these songs were important to music history, and he handled them with respect. Whenever he approved a use or made a decision, he was thinking as a businessman, not as a competitor or someone trying to upset a friend. Michael believed the catalog could be used in ways that honored the music and brought it to new audiences. He had no intention of making Paul uncomfortable, and he certainly never intended to create tension. Yet, even with these good intentions, Michael sometimes heard comments from interviews where Paul gently expressed his disappointment. Those comments confused him. Michael couldn't understand why something so clearly legal and fair was now touching the emotional side of their friendship. He believed he had done nothing wrong and had followed the same advice Paul had given him. But Michael also didn't know how to fix something that he didn't fully understand. He wasn't sure what Paul wanted him to say or do, and so he stayed quiet, hoping the situation would settle on its own. As the years went by, their paths continued to drift apart. They weren't avoiding each other on purpose. It just happened naturally. Their schedules were busy, their careers were demanding, and the world around them was always moving fast. But the lack of communication made it harder and harder for either of them to take the first step toward clearing the air. Fans began noticing the change, too. They wondered why Michael and Paul were no longer making music together. Their collaborations had been so joyful, and their chemistry had been praised by critics and audiences everywhere. Without knowing the whole story, people created their own explanations. Some blamed business, some blamed personalities. Others believed the friendship had simply run its course. Only a few people close to them knew that the truth was far more gentle and far more complicated. Public discussions added another layer of tension to the story. Many reporters exaggerated details to make the situation sound dramatic. Some articles tried to portray the catalog purchase as a major betrayal. Others tried to paint Paul as jealous or Michael as insensitive. These stories were not true, but they created noise. noise that made the quiet misunderstanding between the two artists even harder to fix. Paul eventually spoke in more interviews about his hope to regain control of his songs. He explained that the catalog meant something personal to him, something emotional. He talked about memories with John, about the early days of songwriting, and about the feeling of seeing his own creations owned by someone else. When he mentioned Michael's name, he did not speak harshly. He spoke with a calm tone, but the disappointment still came through. People often forgot that Paul was human. They saw him as a legend, a superstar, a musical giant. But beneath all of that, he was simply someone who had poured his heart into his music. And when you love something that deeply, it is natural to feel a quiet sadness when you lose control over it. Michael, too, faced his own misunderstandings. Some people accused him of buying the catalog for power or control, but that was never his intention. Michael loved music. He saw the catalog as a way to preserve great art. He believed in protecting songs from getting lost or forgotten. He also believed that owning music was a smart financial decision, something any artist with long-term goals would consider. Michael rarely responded publicly to criticism, but the misunderstandings hurt him in their own quiet way. While all of this was happening, the two artists were also growing in different directions creatively. Michael was entering new eras of his career, creating albums, performing around the world, and exploring new sounds. Paul was continuing to write, record, and tour, staying close to the music that had defined his life for so long. They were still connected by mutual respect, but their worlds were slowly drifting further and further apart. There were moments when either of them could have reached out, but they never did. Not because they didn't care, but because they didn't know how to begin. Time can make simple conversations feel heavy. The longer things remain unspoken, the harder it becomes to speak them. And so, the silence between Michael and Paul grew, gently but steadily. Years later, their story became a quiet lesson in how friendships can be affected by misunderstandings, even when both sides have good intentions. They never stopped respecting each other. They never stopped appreciating one another's talent, but they also never fully repaired what had been softened by silence and shaped by public attention. When people look back on their friendship today, they often remember their joyful collaborations, the laughter in the studio, the playful energy in Say, 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 the warmth in their voices when they spoke about each other before the catalog sale. They remember the music, the harmony, and the sense of partnership that seemed unbreakable. But behind the smiles and melodies was a very human story. A story of two artists who cared for each other but were separated by quiet misunderstandings, emotional expectations, and the complicated world of business. They were not enemies. They were not rivals. They were simply two people caught in a situation where neither knew how to heal the distance growing between them. And so, the public saw the surface of the fallout, but the truth was much softer and much more human. It was a story not of anger, but of confusion, not of betrayal, but of sadness, not of sharp conflict, but of gentle drifting apart. As the years passed, the friendship between Michael Jackson and Paul McCartney slowly became a memory, soft, distant, and untouched, like a photograph kept in a drawer. They had once shared laughter, creative energy, and a genuine connection that inspired millions. But now their paths moved in different directions, shaped by time, careers, responsibilities, and the quiet misunderstanding that neither of them fully resolved. Michael continued to take care of the ATV catalog with the same seriousness he gave to his music. He often said that songs were like living stories that needed to be protected. He saw himself not as an owner, but as a guardian of something bigger than business. Whenever he approved or discussed the use of certain songs, he did it with respect and thoughtfulness. He believed that great music should continue reaching new generations, and he always made decisions with that in mind. Yet, Even as he managed the catalog with honesty, he occasionally felt a small emotional tug when he thought about Paul. The memories of their time together had been joyful. Two artists laughing in a studio, sharing ideas, blending their styles, and inspiring each other. Those moments had felt easy and natural, and Michael sometimes wished things had never changed. He never expressed this openly, but it lived quietly in his heart. Paul, too, continued to think about the past, though he rarely spoke about it. Each time he performed Beatles songs on stage, he felt the deep meaning behind the music. Those songs represented memories of his youth, of his partnership with John Lennon, and of the journey he had taken as one of the world's most beloved songwriters. Even though the catalog belonged to Michael now, Paul still felt proud each time the music touched an audience. But behind that pride was a small feeling of distance that had grown between him and a friend he had once admired deeply. When Paul gave interviews, he sometimes mentioned the catalog situation, but he always spoke in a calm and measured way. He never accused Michael of wrongdoing. Instead, he expressed his feelings gently, like someone talking about a door that had quietly closed. He explained how he had hoped to regain control of the songs he had written, but he never said anything hurtful about Michael. Paul remained respectful, careful, and kind, even when speaking about something that carried emotional weight. Michael, on the other hand, tried to understand Paul's feelings, though he still saw the situation through a different lens. To him, business was separate from friendship. He never believed he had acted unfairly. He remembered Paul's advice about owning music and thought he had followed it wisely. Michael hoped Paul would one day see the purchase not as a personal loss, but as a strategic decision made with respect and admiration. But time passed, and the conversation that might have brought clarity never happened. Outside their personal thoughts, the world continued to build stories around them. Fans read headlines, journalists wrote articles, music experts debated ownership, creativity, and legacy. People often spoke about the $47.5 million deal as if it were a dramatic moment in music history. In truth, the emotional story behind it was far quieter. Two kind-hearted men who never meant to hurt each other but were separated by misunderstandings and unspoken expectations. Over the years, the catalog became even more valuable. Music publishing changed, technology advanced, and the way people listened to songs evolved. Record players became CDs, CDs became digital files, and digital files became streaming services. Through all these changes, the Beatles' songs remained timeless. Each new generation discovered them as if they were brand new, and through it all, Michael's ownership of the catalog remained a major part of the music industry's history. Eventually, Michael made another major business move. He merged ATV with Sony's publishing division, forming Sony ATV, one of the largest and most influential music publishing companies in the world. For many people, this deal was a sign of Michael's incredible business intelligence. He had transformed his investment into something even greater, something that would influence music publishing for decades. Paul continued his creative journey as well. He wrote new songs, recorded new albums, and performed concerts around the world. He always gave his full energy on stage, singing with the same passion he had in his early days. Fans loved him for his warmth, his sense of humor, and the joy he brought to every performance. Even though he didn't own the Beatles' catalog at the time, he continued singing the songs with pride and love. The audience's smiles reminded him why he had written them in the first place. Despite everything, both men carried a quiet admiration for each other. Paul knew Michael was talented beyond measure, a performer who had changed music forever. Michael knew Paul was a songwriting genius whose melodies had shaped the world. They respected each other deeply, even if their friendship had faded into silence. In the years that followed, people often wondered whether Michael and Paul ever had a chance to repair their friendship. Some believed they might have shared small conversations behind closed doors. Others believed they simply accepted the situation and chose to move forward separately. No one knows the full truth, because neither of them ever publicly revealed every detail. What is clear, however, is that there was never bitterness between them, only a soft sadness rooted in misunderstanding. When the world later lost Michael, Paul spoke about him with tenderness and respect. He shared memories of the young man who had visited his home, played with his family, and created joyful music with him in the studio. Paul did not talk about the business deals or disagreements. Instead, he chose to remember the laughter, the creativity, and the warmth they had shared. His words showed that deep down, the foundation of their friendship had always been built on respect. Michael's fans, too, remembered how much he admired Paul. They recalled interviews where Michael spoke fondly of the Beatles and praised Paul's songwriting. That admiration never went away. Even when their friendship changed, Michael always held a place in his heart for the music Paul had created. Today, the story of Michael Jackson and Paul McCartney is remembered not only for the catalog purchase, but for the human relationship behind it. It is a story that teaches how easily misunderstandings can grow when feelings are left unspoken. It shows how business and emotion sometimes mix in unexpected ways. And it reminds us that even the strongest friendships can be touched by silence. Yet it is also a story filled with beauty. Their collaborations created songs that still bring joy. Their connection brought together two generations of music. Their respect for each other never fully disappeared, even as life pulled them in different directions. In the end, the $47.5 million deal became one of the most famous moments in music industry history, not only because of its size, but because of the friendship it quietly changed. Paul and Michael were never enemies. They were two remarkable artists who once stood side by side, creating magic before drifting into separate paths shaped by time, emotion, and the gentle weight of unspoken words. And though their friendship faded, the music they made and the love they shared for the art continues to shine brighter than any misunderstanding ever could.